Hey, soldiers, the central banks of these governments throughout the world are out there buying gold at a clip that we have not seen in close to a century. It's been 72 years since we've seen this kind of gold buying by central banks. Now, you need to understand what's going on here because the central banks are doing this for a reason, a very important reason that we will get into in a moment. This has history to it. And you need to take a look at this situation and decide whether or not what these central banks are doing, how it might affect you, should some aspect of what they're doing be grafted onto your personal financial plan. Only you can decide that, but we are going to give you some facts today to help you at least start doing some due diligence along that route. Now, we've got a lot going on in the world today. Of course, we had the state of confusion delivered by Joe Biden the other day.
Name me a world leader who changed places with Xi Jinping. Name me one. Name me one.
And he said, hey, United States is doing great, man. And I guess it is from his perspective. But the reality is we still have high inflation. These unemployment numbers are suspect. We've reported on that many times because a lot of people are out of work and having difficulty finding a job. So we've got that situation going on. That inflation piece, again, is big. And it's coming at the same time that we've got rising interest rates, putting additional pressure on the consumer. Then we've got the war in Eastern Europe. Got that still going on, which is causing energy shortages because Russia was a gigantic energy supplier and now been taken offline via sanctions. And we may have a war coming up in Asia if the government of China decides, hey, now's the time to take back Taiwan, because the occupant in the White House over in Washington, D.C. is certainly not someone who's on his A game. All right. So the next 2 years would definitely be the time to do that. Maybe that's why they're flying balloons over our territory and doing all sorts of other things. So there's a lot of chaos in the world, but there is one source of stability, and it has been a source of stability for literally thousands of years, and that's gold. We're going to tell you why these central banks are doing what they're doing, but first let's take a look at what they're doing. Now, the central banks closed out 2022 with reported net purchases of 28 tons of gold in December, including large unreported purchases. Now, we had done the report on that and kind of showed you how somebody out there was buying a hell of a lot of gold, but they weren't reporting it. And the size of the purchases could only have been governments, okay? So what was going on brought total central bank gold buying in 2022 to 1,136 tons. It was the second highest level of net purchases on record dating back to 1950, and the 13th straight year of net central bank gold purchases. China officially started buying gold again in November and made another large purchase of 30 tons in December. That raised China's total gold reserves to over 2,000 tons for the first time. The Chinese central bank accumulated 1,448 tons of gold between 2002 and 2019 and then suddenly went silent. Many speculate that the Chinese continued to add gold to its holdings off the books during those silent years. Now, we don't really know how much China has, or any country for that matter, but we do know that China has been very tight-lipped about what they're doing with regard to gold. They mine gold in several places throughout the world, their territories, places in Africa, and all of it stays in China. Okay, they don't give it away. They don't sell it. They keep it because they realize its value. The other thing you have to understand is, as an Eastern nation with a lot of history, they take a view of gold that is totally different from us here in the United States. Okay. They recognize it more readily in terms of the value it has. Now, because we've been living under this system where the dollar has been as good as gold for a long time, and has been the de facto reserve currency of the world, we haven't looked at gold like some other countries have because of the stability of the dollar. That's all changing. Now, there are reasons why these purchases are being made. And the rest of the countries, all of the countries have a specific reason. China has a reason, in a particular reason, okay, that is unique from many of the other countries. And that reason, we'll get to that in just a minute, but I want you to also know that the Central Bank of Turkey continued consistent buying in December, adding another 25 tons to its swelling gold reserves. Over the course of 2022, Turkey added about 150 tons of gold to its hoard. Croatia bought 2 tons of gold after having not reported any changes in its gold reserve since 2001. After a pause in November, the Reserve Bank of India resumed purchasing gold in December with a modest 1-ton purchase. India ranks as the 9th largest gold holding country in the world. Since resuming buying in late 2017, the Reserve Bank of India has purchased over 200 tons of gold. In August of 2020, there were reports that the RBI, which is the Bank of India, was considering significantly raising its gold reserve. So we've seen these pauses in the purchase, a long, decade-long or more pauses in the purchasing of gold by these nations, by these central banks. Why are we seeing it come up again? Well, let's talk about China first. Now, China has a dual purpose. The main purpose that China has for buying gold is that they've made no secret about it. They want to look at developing some sort of currency that could be backed by gold. All right. Sound far-fetched? Well, that's where we were up until the early 1970s when Nixon took us off the gold standard. So China may want to return to something like that in some form or fashion. They are undergoing this realignment with Saudi Arabia to make purchases of oil in yuan. So we're looking at a resource-backed, a petro yuan that may also be backed by gold. Okay, who knows? Okay, let's take a look at the top gold holding countries in the world. The United States of America is, of course, the undisputed champion at 8,133.5 tons. We've got Germany. Germany's coming in second. Now look at the gap between number 1 and number 2. Germany has 3,355.1 tons of gold. Then Italy, France, Russia. Then China. China's in 6th place. Or are they? This list, who knows if it's right or not, depending on what these countries are reporting versus what they actually hold. Now, on this list, we come all the way down, and Austria is the lightweight, at least in the top 20. They are number 20 at 280 tons. Okay, 280 tons exactly is what they're reporting. All right, so that's how it kind of pans out. Saudi Arabia, it's interesting. They have 323.1 tons, but you know what else they have? They have oil. So it kind of explains their position, right? United Kingdom, 310.3. So that's what we have here in terms of the amounts of gold held by the different central banks. But you can see this list encompasses Western countries. So you've got the United States, you got NATO countries, EU countries, you've got Eastern Bloc companies like Uzbekistan, you've got Asian countries like China, Japan, India. Okay, so the recognition of gold as a valuable stabilizer is evident here by the diversity of countries that hold on to it. Now, there has always been speculation that China holds far more gold than it officially reveals. As Jim Rickards pointed out on the Mrs. Daily back in 2015, many people speculate that China keeps several thousand tons of gold off the books in a separate entity called the State Administration for Foreign Exchange, or SAFE. Interesting acronym. The Central Bank of Turkey continued buying. Okay, so you got Turkey, Croatia, we talked about them. Kazakhstan, Uzbekistan, they're adding 29 tons and 1 ton respectively. And when we talk about, look at little Uzbekistan, 1 ton. A ton is a lot of gold, okay? So even though they're lightweights in terms of their recent buying, 1 ton is a lot of gold. December purchases brought the total net increase in central bank gold reserves in the fourth quarter of 2022 to 417 tons. Through the second half of 2022, central banks bought 862 tons of gold. So in 2022, central bank buying represented a 152% increase from 2021. It was the highest level of annual net central bank gold purchases since the suspension of dollar convertibility into gold in 1971, and the second highest annual total on record. The record was 1967. Okay, let's get into why the other countries, including China, are buying gold. According to the World Gold Council, let me stop right here. You know, we didn't report America, right? I bet you America is purchasing and they're just not divulging it. But let's continue. That's just speculation. That's fine. According to the World Gold Council, there are two main drivers behind central bank gold buying: its performance during times of crisis and its role as a long-term store of value. Stop right there, because that could have ramifications for us, okay, as individuals. We've been over it 1,000 times in terms of gold's ability to hold on to its value. I will give you the analogy once again. Let's say that King Tut, he was buried with all of the gold and everything. And when they went and dug him up, let's say he was reanimated through some crazy process. He would be as wealthy as he was the day he died, however long ago it was, I think maybe 1,000 years ago or more. He would be just as wealthy. Now, he wouldn't be more wealthy, but he would be just as wealthy because that gold would have preserved its purchasing power. Okay. King Tut died around 1300 BC, and believe it or not, he would still be as wealthy as he was because he held that gold and it would have held on to its value. World Gold Council head of research Juan Carlo Artigas told Kitco News that the big purchases underscore the fact that gold remains an important asset in the global monetary system. He said even though gold is not backing currencies anymore, it is still being utilized. Why? Because it's a real asset. All right. It's not dependent on whether or not your government maintains power. All right. It's an asset that has transcended governments, has seen literally thousands of them come and go. Globally, central banks have added net reserves for 13 straight years. In that time, they bought over 6,800 tons of gold. Now, I want you to understand that the last time we saw this rate of gold purchasing back in 1950, okay, so 72 years ago, there was something going on in the world that was pretty much similar to what's going on now. Between 1939 and 1952, the dollar lost half its buying power. Okay, so you had the Cold War, okay, in full swing. So you had a lot of uncertainty, instability. You had the world's reserve currency, the dollar. And at that point, the dollar was relatively new as the world's reserve currency because the UK had lost that distinction with the pound a couple of decades earlier. So there was a lot of uncertainty out there. Okay, we just come out of World War II. There was a lot of suspicion who was going to get the bomb next and all that kind of stuff. So the central bank started resorting to gold. So we see that in times of turmoil, this is what they do. Now, the selling of gold has not been as precipitous as the buying by central banks. I'm a big fan of holding on to assets and not selling them if you can possibly make that happen. And they're holding on to gold, okay, and buying more. So take a look at it for yourself. These gold videos I do typically do not, for whatever reason, they're not popular. And I think because, again, the majority of the viewership is from America and Western Europe. And again, philosophically, we don't look at gold in the same way that our brothers and sisters in the East tend to. I do want you to take a look at this report. Danger for the dollar. More countries are actually getting rid of the dollar or minimizing their use of it in favor of gold. Why is that happening? Check out the report, guys. I'll talk to you soon.